당도 가서 어디 잡아침비기 줄이야 로정제 냠린제 비게다 룸제 마선다데 로정비 체로다 다로 가르용 그래서네 아니 저기 잡아침비기 체수 잡아치 중에 최근에 지내야 타도 아니 산지고 뭐 토비 쳐도 송바 나 아니 다세 마리바 님비기 치도 송바 이바 지바체 지바이 먹고 투야다 되네랑의 취해 강제바 탐제 안 다세 마리비 님보 줘도 보지 좋아이나 아니 잡아침비기 냠는 집을 로정위기 체로지레스 안데 안에 지금 소소 방법 이제做这些的让给냠는 지는 랑기 잡아침비 로정 냠는 지도 랑기 셈 유시신 도와 안에 잠재게 라시 잠재게 안델을 때네 령하게 줘봐된 현래 처음에 봐 현래 팬비게 자와들려도 미션기 통과는 오다디 냠내 야고지도 야고도셔스 배 미션기나 지수 일하지야게 게다 되네 랑게네 오당이 도스진 제바디 야고 중샤선 배섬 직대내게 소소든 중화이나 안에 대안에 뻥뻥이 소소선 비게다 소소 냠내 제바디 야고 중화레스 되네는 만족이 다 소소 냠내 제반자 로정 냠내 제도 소소라 갑레야 내나사다 되네 강아 체도 안 될래야 안지기 셈 이미디어 메기와지 어다 되네게 동안요야 되게 찾아 겨왕하면 레기 되고래 세베게데 렌젤라 이체당 대안은 요모베 자와 다세 마레바르티니 중앙자다 다세 마레바디 파 빵고야디 님 조레샤 세베게 되네 빵자디 게바 하고야 근데 로버기 긴기다 내나자 가래 주베나 안델야 안지 대신 하신 진도 도신 삼방토야 되네 디나신 라나 대비 신 심제 탐제 안 되네게 동안 나와 냐데 망보요레스 되네자 데솔레베 닝제 동안다 자와쇼 셈베 니제 고미야 안 되네게 토네다 냠제 고미야데 대주의 그 동아디 수 안즈랑기 수 렌제 랑기 렌바다 랑기 디기다 계획자와 탐제 콘솔파 당구였으면 뭐바진 원념제 곰 도체는 곰토와데 좀 있는다 가상한 쪽이 어디 로정위 체리에서 가상한다 냠린지 잡아침비 줄라 로정 제대 로정 냠린지베 체르고 된 쇼고레에서 디고 슈바레
So, good morning. Yesterday we looked at the fifth of the 7 points, the measure of having trained the mind, particularly having trained the mind in the Mahayana. So this is presented in 3 points, whereby first one recognizes that everything the Buddha taught, he taught in order to aid the cultivation of wisdom. And whilst some of the teachings were explicit about cultivating the wisdom, realizing emptiness, and thereby liberation from cyclic existence, the other teachings were supportive of that in that they aid complementary qualities that will eventually lead to beings gaining freedom from suffering. So thereby, one comes to recognize all the Buddha's teachings were taught with one single purpose. This and other points we looked at show the importance of having a wide and expansive mind, embracing others without criticism, without judgment. And going along with it, there are the specific trainings of the Mahayana. And these, the measure of having trained one's mind is when these are arising naturally, spontaneously, in an uncontrived manner. So amongst these are qualities such as recalling the kindness of others. And thereby, when one encounters others, one feels a closeness with them. This recalling the kindness of others, one builds into affectionate love, into love for others. And then this feeling of affection towards others arises again spontaneously with whomever one meets. One also cultivates compassion, the wish for others to be free of suffering, developing this ever further into eventually wholehearted resolve and bodhicitta itself. So these one needs to train in repeatedly over a sustained period so that they arise in a way that is again uncontrived, spontaneous. Then a further measure is how one deals with hardships, challenges, difficulties. So this measure of having trained one's mind is when one encounters unwanted circumstances, if one naturally, spontaneously relates to it with an understanding of This is the ripening of my non-virtuous karma. And I am going to respond to it with a mind that is virtuous, not with the arisal of afflictions, and thereby I'll transform this adversity into the path to enlightenment. And in this way, one doesn't experience problems as problems, suffering as suffering, difficulties as difficulties. Moreover, one can use this as an inspiration to add to one's training in taking and giving, recognizing that this problem that I am encountering, and I am taking this on and transforming this into the path to enlightenment. I can only do so in dependence on the kindness of so many beings, in that I'm so entwined with them, my cultivation of virtue depends on them. This virtue now, hereby, that I accumulate from transforming adversity into the path, I offer to others. And moreover, one can imagine taking on the suffering of others in a similar circumstance and giving that virtue back to them. So these then are some indicators of the mind having, some measures of the mind having been trained in the Mahayana. Now we come to the penultimate of the 7 points of Mahayana mind training, that of the commitments or the samayas of mind training. Word I've translated as commitment. You'll know the Sanskrit of samayas. So a samaya, or in this case a commitment, what it means is the Lama giving you instructions on a particular boundary and which side of that to stay on. The boundary is, this is what you should be doing, this is what you should not be doing. So this then is the meaning of a commitment or a samaya. The first, train constantly in the 3 general points. Yindok Dokje Gyodeng. So the first samaya has 3 points, and the first then is not having an attitude that is contradictory to mind training. So not having an attitude contradictory to mind training. The second is not pretending to have realizations of mind training. And the third is not having a partial attitude, a biased attitude. So I'll say the 3 again: not having an attitude contradictory to mind training, not pretending to have realizations, and not having a biased or partial attitude.
담자로 지고로다. 에네 예주 돈비게다 장시세베냐는 예주 돈비 수름소야 개발체도 수름소야 안에지게 샘제도지 수름 차사 숨기 진배 파진 중에 냠는 지긴세 킬링고로다. 지자들 타바침비 취념는 되 장시sem게 되네 가소래 전주심 토바 산요고바 토바 전주심에 domba sun고로와 제자다 파진 중에 냠는 지기 있어도 나 domba sun고로 켈린 지고로와 제자다 제 켈린 지에 샘제 된지기 수림지기 순긴 아니 개와치리기 수림 순기 아니 제아 도시네 만족이 순을 켈린 제바에서 다 데니고 로정 지비에 갑을 냠는 디 지기세 켈라제 데니 켈린 바디 마가와치네 안 되는 냠는 제고레스 고로바다 켈라나 메가와세야 돼 말 전주심 냠는 지도제 전주심께 전주심에 도보 쉬리가라 가르켈린 거라서는 라메 아니 결혼 전주심께다 상교고바토 전주심에 도보 쉬고래 결혼 파전 중에 냠는 지기서 켈린 제고래 송고로 전주심에 줘발 랍긴스는 켈린 제고래서 마가나도 어떤 이 켈린 지기스인데 저 초가 된지라 디자인 라메전에 전주심에 줘바 바로 지금도 랍긴스에 켈린 지고로 와다 제자다 domba 송고로 와 제자다 데네 제자 태바 챔피고 냠len 로종 제야야 데네 가르켈이야 요 결혼 냠len 가르치 켈린 제야 데 켈린 제바디 결혼 제고래 디단 가교 말해서 뭐던다 디레바 켈라다 메가 와나네 네 당보 시거로 당 로종 켈라다 메가 와서야 돼 당보들도 와 로종 켈라다 메가 와디 제고래에서 랍고 그랬어야 지가르람나 태바 챔피 취에 전주 셈게 되는 산조고바 토발라 전주 셈에 줘 바로 심 차산 랍긴스 켈라 제바에서 켈라디다 마가와 결혼하면 제고래 켈라나 가와이나 아니 디고 말해서 숨고로다 켈라나 메가 와서야 되래 된 숨네
So the first of the three general points is to not have a contradictory attitude, an attitude contradictory to mind training. So here one makes the commitment that I will train in what is required in order to train my mind in the Mahayana and to attain Buddhahood. So this would be similar to a new bodhisattva who's generated uncontrived bodhicitta and then makes a commitment of engaging bodhicitta, which is when the new bodhisattva takes the vows of the bodhisattva. So there the bodhisattva is making the commitment, I will engage in all the trainings required in order to become a Buddha for the sake of others. And these are, as we know, are condensed into the six perfections. So there the new bodhisattva, when making the vows of the bodhisattva, is making the commitment to train in, for example, the three types of ethics. The ethics of refraining from misdeeds, ethically practicing virtuous qualities, and ethically striving to benefit sentient beings. So when making the promise of a bodhisattva, when one receives the vows, one promises to engage in the six perfections, and that would include, in terms of ethics, these three divisions. So similarly, what is meant here with not having an attitude that is contradictory to mind training is that one will engage in all that is required in order to train one's mind so as to achieve the goals of the Mahayana.
제사다 태화침비 산지고보 토발라 태화침비 취 로정 냠len 제제 산지고보 토고고래 제사다 태화침비 로정 산지고보 토발라 전주 셈게네 안 전주 셈이 줘 바로 치마 랍긴심이 켈렌 담자제 되네 바로 치마 줘 랍고고래 델라바이나 안 산지고보 토고고 토토고로 제사다 셈게 태화침비 취 랍긴스 덤 켈렌 제제 랍야델라 말라바이나 아니 뭐 또보 공부도 야죠 공부 조투마 산요고 토투고 말해서 그러다 라 구글을 마다 말라바이나 산요고 토투고 말라바다 미가와지고 라바다 미가와스데 랍게세 켈렌제 안에 그제 말라바제 데냠을 마제바나 라바드나 가와르바다 근데 이 셈제도 제기 수림 니제도 수림 숨을 랍제 켈렌제 안 수림 마송바이나 안에 측소시야데 주인시바라 소바제바이나 켈렌다 켈란다 가와차로 제사디니 수림 냠는데 탈침바 용투고 말아 제자 제자다 간젤레 로전 제비 갑라 아니 타바침이 취 냠는 로전 제디 되니 안 domba손데 심전 탐지 산요고바 투비지 파진도 제니심이 줘봐 랍긴세 켈렌 차제 디 켈렌 바제 켈렌바 나신지 결혼 야 랍고 그래스 냠는 제고스 마제바이나 아니 가와네 가 미가와스 가나 아니 마제바이나 아니 결혼 산유고 토투 말 얘기 좀 말해서 제가 미가 와서 이렇게 제바 나신 지념는 제고를 송거로 왔다 나디 송거.
The very purpose of the Mahayana Dharma is for beings to come to attain Buddhahood for the sake of others. So this is the very purpose of hearing teachings, Mahayana teachings, and for striving to cultivate the minds of the Mahayana within. And if one does not accept the teachings of the Mahayana, accept them in the sense of take them as this is what I need to engage in, one will not be striving to develop bodhicitta and Buddhahood. One will hear teachings and merely hear teachings. So similar then to that, this first point, not having an attitude contradictory to mind training, if one does not accept the teachings of the Mahayana, one will not train in them. Therefore, bodhicitta and Buddhahood will not be achieved. So, for example, if one is wanting to, at least expresses the thought, oh, I want to become a Buddha for the sake of others, but then, for example, engages in behavior that brings harm to sentient beings, that harms beings, one is not keeping one's ethics well, and therefore, how can one hope to perfect the training in ethics? So what this commitment comes down to, this first one, is that I will train in the way that I'm guided. So this comes with the understanding, because if I do not, I will not achieve the goals of the Mahayana. So again, to recite what this is, not having an attitude contradictory to mind training, that contradictory attitude would be, I'm not going to train in the way guided, and having that attitude, one will not achieve the goals of the Mahayana. So therefore, it comes down to the commitment that I will train in the way guided.
추tum이 라바 충자래야 아데팅아 냠는 음윤이다 semjan 함지 산조고마도 장주셈 냠는 타바침베추 로전 지규 나디소데 마제나 디규에서데 포 충자되게 벤 추팅이 라바 두위 라와라서 바딘 충자되게 바 계수에지는 바 이제 제고 말했은 두스는 샤바나 다 되네 지규 말해서 다 되네 용식이다 같이 용당을 아다팅아 음윤이 야고주고 다 디소데 마제나 디규에서데 어디 지규 말해서 최신간에 청소 가리네 조스는 순송해야 되게 차상 송고를 해서 그러다.
So if one accepts to train in the Mahayana so as to cultivate bodhicitta and move the bodhisattva paths and grounds and attain Buddhahood, then one is accepting to train in the way required to do that. But then a contradictory attitude would be, for example, yes, I'm striving to become a bodhisattva and become a Buddha for the sake of others. But this instance of unethical behavior, this doesn't really matter. Generally, I'm striving for a great goal, so harming in this way, it doesn't really matter. So this is contradictory to the achievement of one's goal, and this is what one is promising not to do.
Is that 준시 초 말에서 송로다 지선 준시기 매세디 지켈림바인자 다 베네 저기 메니 가사실 다가 제모단 뒤에 토네 제모제제 준시에 저 연구를 받아 지사 디네자다 디네게 냠르지도 디네 켈레제 디네 가이가브 어당에 디디나디 냠는 지유 다 장유습니다 참 이제 공부 다 디네 다 제모라 진디 셴레 지시 제모제네 또 준로시 디시 제셰를 가르 디부야요 디산이기 다 손셔야 돼. 디부양어스 가이미도 아세베 삼단진 데네 제모도 제유트네 준로시베나 데네 산이기 준시 좀말 송아들레 계셔다 디비토네 안 준시 준차로 그래. 데네 디부 용거래. 해서 디부 침모차 디부체 용거래. 그래서 데네기 그래서다 데네기 준시에디게 파제모던 디유토네네 균이 시교 말해서 다 데네 타바침비지. 가시다 가제 제모던 Daddy Gazadik had the mini Giwanyam Chigor, me, Zemozema to Kolokan, New Samba, Series and Betone, and the Jun Shigo, among Zemos and Shigor, and some Loch Corчин, and Zemos and Junshan Kaminuas, the Sayig, the Gawa Kaminuas, the Divasao Kaminuas, the Nesam Lotone, and Junshiva Yonsi, Yungres, until Junchur bed some jet, Duschene, Sheva Yungre. Shigyo mare, Dennis in a Shigyo mare, so Chunchu Garine, that don't Shigyo mare, so Zemon the TV Tony in a Shigyo mare. The patient was Mason.
Give a further example. One makes a commitment that I will refrain from non-virtuous speech, including I will not tell lies. No one makes such commitments and then thinks to oneself, surely small lies don't really matter, in particular, if I make them in a context of a joke. So I'm teasing someone, and I'm joking around with them, and I'm willfully deceiving someone, lying to someone. But because it's in the context of a joke, surely it is fine. So this is contradictory to training one's mind. In particular, this dismissive attitude is this dismissive attitude to the Buddhist teachings of, the Buddha didn't mean this kind of thing, I'm just joking. So this is non-virtuous, and someone who's serious about cultivating the paths and taking the paths to the state of completion, they will refrain from minor non-virtue too.
Those Tanala, Denigi, and Sunja Kalimbati, Chasa, Chambo and Chuja Kainet, Chamazan and Makuba, Sunguri, said the night and the Jikre Daddy.
So therefore, this first general point, not having an attitude contradictory to mind training, means one should be training one's mind in accordance with the Mahayana in all instances, and not excusing minor non-virtue, but refrain from all non-virtue.
That Lojong Tojo the Mason said, Diana Lojong Tojo the Maso said, Diana Manzugi, Jike Diungore, Tojo said, Yangala Mizemba, Jeshabat, Yu Shebar, Yanga Ganga Cheso Yus and Mazimba Jedi. Denigi, a Jik Tojo said, does Yuru Jeshabat, Denny. Tojo said, Delia Mero Danshana, on I made Sigmar and part Megan Chamba, Yuru, I mean Yangarua, Chunalba Choma Chu take care of Yanga Yor, Sol and Yanga Yorba, then Yangala Mazemba, Pa, Yanga Samata Chunal Chombeada. Danger, Yanga, already. Then she did some Dad of Juna. Did them drove on the coast soldiers in Yanga, in that Maro Zembo or Digin. So, dear Kashi Mazemba, the Chomba Puchu in that Zemshing Marwa, Jason Janet in Dugua, she said the coast soldier in Yanga Yorba, Yanga said it. The Chihu is Yanga la Mazemba Chebana, Yanga la Mazet Zembo Wada. Then the Dukes and the Shigres and the Secular Zembo, Kashi Duksasha or Mazemba, Duksasha Jorwade. She's a Yangala Mazemba. That was it. Mazemba Lana, Zembalana, Machivarova, Mazemba Lana Jevarovada. Dukes and a Shigua, Nazatangrua. She's another time at Zembo, Jigio Marwa, Gawadi. Jesa Makawaji Sasha Yorwa, Buchu in the Zemshing Marwa, do Garden Sasha Rua, quote Zemshing, the Michin or the Tisan, Nagri, Nugus and Big Park, Zemgrua, Zembasina, Park Sumba Surua. The Mazembas in the Masua, Lalan Jeshavas Goro, Jesa Yangala Mazemba, Gangala Mazemba Sash. Jesa Mazembas. The Denigger Tojo said, the Nation go to torture Jabba said, that they sick torture said. Torture Jabba said it. Chisada Dini Jigyo Marse, Yangala Mazimbe, Yu di Jawa Jigyo Marella or Dondala, Karasi was in a Karim was in that Yamlin Chigu, Anechige, 잠니지요 랑 제진이 매 선배게 냠는지는 태바침에 취해 냠는 제기도 랑 제진 다신 말에 랑 제진디 매 도도 제제 여바이나 샬레 매 도도 제제 안에 지기 이제 저러와다 냥아 여바이나 냥아들 맞아 봐 저와 제 저러 어디 지겨 말해서 오다
So these three general points, that was the first, not having an attitude contradictory to mind training, and the second, not pretending to have realizations. Realizations maybe it's a strong word here, but like qualities that you don't have, not pretending to have qualities that you actually lack. So this refers to, for example, if someone is training in mind training, then needs to be very clear in how they present themselves, in that not presenting to themselves as having qualities that they don't really have. For example, if there is a challenging situation, so dangerous or challenging situation, and one presenting oneself as, I'm a practitioner of mind training, therefore I'm guided by love and by compassion, and I'm skilled in transforming difficulties into the path to enlightenment. Therefore, in this challenging situation, I'm going to get involved. When one actually is, whereas in reality, that challenging situation is beyond one's capacity. So this is where one is pretending to have realizations or pretending to have qualities that one doesn't, by putting oneself into situations which are really beyond one's capacity, and doing so through wanting to be seen as having qualities that one lacks.
When I 시민으로 가서서나 카시네 강아 중국으로와 미가시기 아데 지금 로신봉알 강아 예매도도 카시네 강아 용구여배네 아니 지금 매도도 제제 거의 다 집에 수사샤다 아다 지우슈도 사자지로 이내 던 치제 카치야다 되네기 조치에 강아 쉬어배네 현래 매도도 제제 어당아디 되네기 돌아 장도여도 매도도 제제 되네선에 강아 되네기 카치야다 조치에 냥아 강아 여배네 강아들 맞은 받지 안 현래 주들 어다 되네 강아들 책이 매도도 제제 제 용구로 하다 아니 아직 가시 아직 소설이야 지금 고호라 강아유나 편이 파줘들이야 제로시네 아직 소식이 딱나 진변냠내시고 동심시고 야고 예도도 제신 되네 매나나 되네게 제셔야 용식이로 하다 되네게 잘라 친구지 밀려 제 주변에 제게 되고 매나야 你现在知道我东西全部东西全部修约，你们修契约多这些，把现在没多这有了吧？但现在都现拿到了现在修对吧？这去了吧？今现在没多这修了，都是个，但看这里今年几个嘛的时候，这张开始给他今年用过，但你们就让其实没多些，然后也开始那这些的，但就米说蒙蔽记里啊，俺就觉得这个。这个生意通的嘛，这个要每天他要用过的呢，那就把他要用过的，可是从他你们打算让其实这帮菜的上边上，可能给他让其实帮呀嘛，都可能搞到什么时候呢？他正好他不去没去，你们就让其实帮，让其实没多钱，现在的呀，让其实吃上帮没多钱，啊，那点的钱用过的，那这些点的几个嘛，那时候就说。而且国家党也采购了，等到了现国家党也有采购了吧？等那些，所以说给对面呢，这越多，就是俺们的就点来刚刚听嘛的，俺的其实是这越多这就了，俺的这个嘛的时候了。
So give a few illustrations to make this point of not pretending to have qualities that you lack. So one. Really from everyday society, as opposed to from the perspective of a Dharma practitioner, would be if you are amongst friends and you generally enjoy food with chili, and you are given a dish which is really hot, but you need to show to others just what a tough person you are, that you can handle this. So you eat the food, you're burning inside, your eyes are probably watering up and your face has gone red, but you say, not a big deal at all. In fact, compared to what I usually eat, this is mild. So this is a very clear illustration from everyday life, where you're pretending to be something that you're not. You have qualities that you lack. So where this would be played out by someone engaging in mind training, but wanting to be seen as a practitioner of mind training, they would, for example, act in a way before others to display their other cherishing attitude. So this could be done in many ways, but from how one's speaking, how one acts before others, with this wish to be seen in a particular way, as someone who has no self-interest, who's always giving to others. So there's this deceptive attitude motivating here. This pretense needs to be abandoned. Or when one has the opportunity to practice generosity and perhaps to give something of value to someone in need, one does so with a clear hope to be perceived as a generous person. Hopefully there'll be an audience around, so one can do a display with great humility, not wanting to say anything about it, making this generous gift. But inside, one's aching a little bit. One doesn't really want to give away this much money or this particular gift. So one's mind of generosity, the wish to give, this is quite undeveloped, but the wish to be perceived as a generous person, this is much stronger. So what this point comes down, the second one, not pretending to have qualities that one lacks, is being deceptive of others in the context of pretending to have qualities of mind training, qualities as a practitioner that one actually lacks.
Yasa delia drumji yare drumji yawa. Nima nganzu that jasa that drumre that jabachita that tsingi lobsang tsingi dang jabachikje. Ane ya deni member that ko ngakwa rochi nyamle ngakwa rochi je. Ni nyamdo taru musil tuore lare. Da kuni sodi nyungu da kala sodi kala de that kusai zo nyungyung mat mindwa. Mindida niga gopshikesana kala nyunyu madra za jo dada jan rangmen sarwada. Da ngakwa di samla karta sana ko gulong member samta cha kala chasang korong sawo jamdo. Jenjine da ko ber sambasne ngi di kala nalba chimdo chimba lu샤베나 da 잡ati ko be zor chine sag mares 지사 코 먹을래기래서 지사 차상 알아서야 라기래 삼제 어디네 삼제 그 칼라 파 토로지 파 저사 자기 파셔 차상 쇠 사러 와다 당보 침발 위에제 다 칼라 토로지 세대 칼라 자기 차상 저지 파셔 차용도 어느 그 나바데 가르지었으나 ngakbare gomong shu gyaze ngale namdo yo ma namdo chasang ba chare di zokbare di yakbure zangbare sin zo zangba na zokbage namdo ga yo ma res ngana jo bala namdo me sin ko chimaji ba kalan ma po sin bu yu are sele di she ta bo.
I'll tell a story. So this is a story, it's not necessarily something that happened, but two people were traveling together. One was a learned monk, and the other was a lay yogin. And so they were traveling, but between them had very little food. So they were on their journey, they were sharing their food, but they had the equivalent of a single meal. So in other words, not enough. If they shared it equally, it wouldn't be enough for either of them. They both had the wish to have this food because they were hungry. They were probably was back in the day, so they were walking quite a distance. So the Nakpa had the thought, I really want to have this meal. Maybe what I can do is I can make the food a little bit disgusting. Maybe put my saliva on it, because it doesn't matter so much to me, but the monk's not going to want to eat the food flavored with my saliva. And then I can also say, I'm a yogin. I'm free of conceptual consciousnesses. Therefore, for me, there's no good, there's no bad, there's no tasty, there's no not tasty. So this was his plan.
다zen 남도 요래데 고군로데 칼라데 코로나 사고 삼제 고군로로지 두자 삼다제 아니 데니셰로 와다 단 디지가데 잡아디게다 고 소보 침도 유자 칼라스 하야데 되어요 말와다 고 조구라 생 말와 또고 이네 잡아들랴 칼라딜레 소수게 나 사고도 다zen 요도 요로 와다 이네다 잡아디 칼라스는 난주바세데 나래야 넘님 곰제바산티 장마다 조화다 남도 가요 남도 시상 까차리 진에 거기 칸에 디네 랍진에 던두시네 침도 유지 칼라데 코로나사고 삼르와 난다 잡아디기 갈라스 다딩알 셈나시에 코 칼라샤상 코로사시 코로나 조보 수에시 나 사메바지 그 강존 두스제샤 삼제 다 잡아디 삼다래 제자다 한데 생이베세디 파 다도 주머루 파 제바 휴치시네 주지데 강라 떼마가 랑문데 두베 다도 주바세 요마레스 내바자 다세 요마레스 알이야 제자 나 생이발라 다zen 메스네 다 다zen에 수 다보야 야고 제바 징루와다 다zen면에 유셔르와 칼라 벤자라 긴이네 다zen면에 다보 다zen에서 말디 고고도 다 진바르와 다자라 긴이디게다 디 고고 민스는 다도 맞은 봐 유루와 제자데 생이베데 칼라스는 콜이야 dondaalo ko dazen banyo ma dazen deorwa ine da ko nga chenyi pala dazen me la da ko nga chenyi ba de da do zhuba jeba nga zu chenyi ba de da do zhuba jeba jin pa ximju ji ne da me do cha le je sang la dazen yo ma le nga chenyi pala dazen me ne da ko kha ba di da nga le sa me ba ko sem na je ni ko la sa me ba sem na je ho sam je nga chenyi pala dazen me je kha la di ja ji pa yu sha de ni ga sa me ba cha de是
So the Nakpa then enacted his cunning plan. The monk then, he thought to himself, yeah, now I don't really want to eat this, but I'm now that it's like mixed with the Nakpa's saliva. But I'm not very impressed with his behavior. Really, now he gets all the food and I get nothing. I'm really not happy with this. So he came up with his cunning plan. So he said, yeah, so maybe in your meditations, you have there's no delicious, there's no not delicious, and so forth. But I am a great debater, and therefore I have come to recognize that I'm selfless, that there is no, and I have no self-grasping. So as I don't grasp at the self, I don't grasp at anything. And then he threw the food away. Not grasping at the food, he threw it away. Then they both had nothing.
생이바디 코로나 다진 빵요 말 다진 요르데 나 코잉알 셈네 제바데 레징이 코로나에 파 지지긴 삼제 어는 다진 예바나 코 다진 매도 도제제네 나 나치 다진 매 다진 유샤르바 제자디 코 지gle 다진 요르데 다진 매도 도제제 파 유바레스 제자다 지gle 남도 요르데 남도 매도 도제네 코 지제바르바다 가지 니가 예데 바지 매도 도제제 아니 니가 사야데 매바 니가 매바스 차소르바다 제자디 베센로지 So
what we see here is both of these people were pretending to have qualities that they lacked. The one pretended in meditation to abide without any conceptual consciousness and therefore could engage without discrimination or differentiation. And the monk, he presented to be this great debater who had abandoned self-grasping. And what is the outcome of their mutual deceit is that they both mutually lost out.
지게 삼날 년부 된지 로종 잠니지 전주심 냠는 제바이자 로지드 말랑 지신스요 말에 삼비기 다 데니기 유해나라 다 미션나라 어당한 로저 랑지스메 요 말에 도도 제제 아니现在内边教话当那让些内边教话安这没告诉我的没来比教话的解决嘛的时候当然就对的这个就对的了先过当下个的话就是原来没多多些的俺今年的几个俺的刚刚听嘛是的那个当然甚至他们这个对的甚至他们上就好特别是给你呢讲你就公个月让精神上了没在的呢这个那个的马里巴当，今现在那边教啊，这边教啊，些用过了的，我的那个没多，这越南的没多，这些都解决嘛的时候了。
So what this point comes down to, that one should be very clear not to present yourself explicitly or imply that one has qualities that one actually lacks. Presenting, for example, that through my meditations on recalling the kindness of others, cultivating love and compassion as well as wisdom, really I don't act under the influence of self-cherishing. Other cherishing is dominant. Because if one is presenting oneself in this way, so this is what one should refrain from, and here comes the reason. Because if one is presenting oneself in a way that exceeds one's actual qualities, one's behavior of speech and physical conduct will deceive others. You'll be acting and speaking in a way that deceives others, and from this, harm will come. Why can one say with confidence harm will come? Because this motivating mind behind the deceptive attitude is one of deception. So therefore, one should refrain from pretending to have qualities that one actually lacks.
영향이 냥아마 여러 넘긴지다 맞는데 제가 말 넘긴도 휴브로 자 휴유에 되간지 되게야 되는 휴유에도 매나 제유도 디나싱아도 로중 냠nen지네 잡아침비 취 냠nen지 지기요 바체 되는 제유도다 되는 토네 야젤이야 매나 유도도지야 마신나 신도도지야 되는 여러 바다 근데 직변의 샘제로 소주 부신으로 소지다다 네, 나게 디나 잠니 자주심 냠내지 캬바치며 취 냠내지 위해서 이제 디베치가 나갈 디베 용 말에도 또 제제 샤나래야 아니 디소야 심진되기야 다시링이 진 투교에도 또 제제 되는게 너무 유토네 다제네 안두시에네 아니가요 망아디 리디나 잠니제다 캬바침비게 아니지 랑제신디 반년 못돼 공고를 해야 돼 미제나 가요 말씀비 되는 시에 저로 받아 밀이야 데 어제서 내내 지겨 말해서다 매나 유도도 누버 매나 누버 유도도 그래서 주의시에다 미슐레미 준나 저에게 내가 친구 용거와 제가 내내자 제수 준나 저에 지겨 말해서 나 임보디래
This point is very clearly for those who are engaging in training. Those who are not trying to train their mind, it's I imagine quite unlikely they'll pretend to have great qualities that they lack. But this is for those who are training the mind, because it's all too easy that when one is starting to experience some transformation of the mind, to get a little carried away and want to tell others, want to show this to others, and so forth. This then can put one inadvertently in a position where you're now needing to defend yourself, defend your reputation as being a practitioner, whereas you're still just starting out. So a very easy illustration is you talk about how one engages in one's meditation, cultivating the mind of the Mahayana, cultivating love and compassion, wisdom and so forth. But one's behavior isn't of a person who has cultivated these qualities within them. But you're presenting yourself as if you are cultivating these qualities, but you're not particularly transformed. So you're still engaged in behavior that brings harm to others, either directly or being dismissive about harming insects, it doesn't matter, for example. So what this comes down to is the negativity of deceiving others, lying to others, either pretending to have qualities that one doesn't, or exaggerating the qualities that one does have. So this is what then one needs to refrain from.
Adine sumbadila direda lojong chorema songa sede. Dan chorewa kashele chiki jeba kashele majeba chorewa se disigurwa. Jizan digare sene adenegi 아주게 딱 잡아침비게 최냠는 제한자 아니 랑기 니로 신의 분야다 니로 되니기 진노를 제베네 델이 안에 가요 말씀하시고 서서 검토와 다 소소기 다오다 소소를 막았으네 안디 델이야 세보고 마투바 제베나 초려바 차고 제사 세베냐면 초지를 세베 검토와 초지를 세베 마투 거기네 네 초려바 차고 제사 디네 지겨 말해 제사 다이나 이나 차바침에 취셔냐면서 니링메바 니나 자나 심장 탐질이야 네 되니기 세보 검토바 제고래 해서지 당한들 되니기 니엘레 세보고 니기 가르강아되나 가요 말씀 통조다 델이야 소소세 마지와 메바 세보 검토야다 근데 랑기 리글라 세보 검바 세바 생이 리글라 검모도 봐시도 랑기 미릭지바 어디 랑기 미릭지바지나 어디게 지나 어디게 노트지나 가요 말씀 베데 삼다야 다랑리 미리 샹다지는 어디도 곧 빼제소서 세보 검마도 봐제바나 되니기 지금 중으로데 베나디 릭 랑기 리글라 세바다 랑기 미르 세바시데 되니기 미리기 찾내야 되데 다지 기합처럼 나간주 기합에 나주 기합 직발에 디고시 나가요 말 먼저 기합만 밖에 샹기합 샹단 비지 어다 디지 빼노르에서 세보고 마도야 야 지금 저 최발이 나간데 남벌에 대코지 남벌 미지 직발에 코지 제베는 어다가 가요 말씀에 콜레서 보고는 then 릭 샹다지게 준 어다 빼노르 빼둑자래서 세보고 마도야잖아 근데 초를 송그랬어 제가 당한테 세배님네 제야디 대바침에 로종 전에 냠렌디 다 랑당신 랑기 니나 자원나 강에만 니링메바 리기 토네 니링메바 아니 랑기 리다 신이리 강에 개발메바 차살이야 아니 세보고 맞지바 니링메바 공부를 물론 니링메바지 제베 땅님 제고를 해서 도시는 냠는 제고를 해서 숨고로다 떠나디리
So the first point, train constantly in the three general points. We've looked at two, now the third general point, which is that of not having a partial attitude. So in other words, one should not be partial or biased or discriminate. So this is something I spoke about a bit yesterday. Just to mention it then briefly. This is where one differentiates beings into various groups, and within those groups, amongst those groups, there are those that you feel closer to, those that you are indifferent towards, and those which you are negative towards. That is what one needs to abandon. So instead of having a partial attitude, we need to have an impartial or equanimous attitude. So where this is expressed is, I'll just mention a number of different groups in relation to those of your race and those of a different race, those of your gender, those of a different gender, those of one's nationality, those of a different nationality, those of your religion, those of another religion, and so forth, whereby one divides other beings into those that one feels an affinity towards, and thereby one divides others into those that one is indifferent towards or negative towards. With such an attitude, then, one will this discrimination will be expressed as a much more accepting attitude when your group commits a fault, does something wrong, as opposed to one of the other groups. There, one will be very negative, especially if it's a group you dislike, and wag your finger and have a lot to say, but you'll be much more understanding when it's your own group. Likewise, when benefit comes to your side, this really carries much more meaning for you. But when benefit comes to a group that you dislike, you're actually a bit upset about that. Or if a problem comes to your group, your mind is disturbed. When that same problem comes to people or a group that you dislike, you may be a little joyous about it. So in this way, we see that this attitude of discrimination is an expression of lacking an equanimous or impartial attitude. So therefore, this is the meaning of the third general point, not having a partial or biased attitude.
ni da ci dambo ni ba shi zhurun sun ya go song do de ne ni ba ta ma song ba de ba shi sui bei nyam de go song do ji sui bei go mya de niering me ba la cha sang ko mo ma de niering ji gyo ma de se je je san de ni ge sim ja tam de du ko re se je da don da la ma ju ge ta바 침비 주님의 제기인도도 제제 시행야 고할다야 다 아니 디발마 셈바디 냠는 지기요 말에 아니 지기 마타바 침비 주님의 지기유도도 제 아시게 지기도 안시행야 제 지게 라젠 니링 술레네 니링 지기요 말에스 제가 가시다 되는 용식이 되는 지기요 말에 돈달라 시행 술레 니링 메바 네 쇠비게 고미야디 네 라젠 참말을 쇠보 곰투야 이고리스 제가 되네 맞게 봐나 아니 지게 디베 제메디게나 아니 지 침송에 되게 차사 니링까지 체중 매봐 아니 체중을 가내시나 첨보디는 송 중중에 있는 바 아당한 냠는지 네가야 말씀해도 계시지 샤기요 말에 제가다 간실에 이 송고에 되게 체중 가내시나 차상 송고리스 안단 쇠베 냠는 땅임 심지어 탐지기 되지 마도 생카시에 되나지 카시 맞아 지 니링 지겨 말해서 온도신의 가질에 드리도
So of with these three general points, restart that. Someone who's committing to train in the Mahayana Dharma, and someone who's training in the Mahayana Dharma, they need to have excellent ethical restraint, as well as the other qualities such as patience. And so, in my opinion, looking at these three general points, these are guidelines to aid one cultivate excellent ethical restraint. Because, for example, the first one, not having an attitude contradictory to mind training, if one is dismissive of small non-virtue, then one's ethics is not going to be of the caliber that is required. Because the goal is to become a Buddha, which means one's qualities need to be developed to an extraordinary extent. And the second, that of not pretending to have realizations. So this is where one engages explicitly, or maybe even inadvertently, in deceptive behavior, where one is comfortable with implying, or maybe even stating, that one has qualities that one does not. So this too is not in accordance with the ethics of someone striving for Buddhahood. And likewise, very clear with a partial attitude. If one has a wish to become a Buddha for the sake of all, one cannot value a group more than another, see one group as more worthy than another, one group as more important than another. This closeness to some and distance from others has to be abandoned.
Then
the second commitment of mind training, change your mindset whilst remaining natural.
마라졸리아 녀마다 랑치생의 삼로 숙천보 여바시 제사당한 랑치세 소스네가 랑이 디기 고도 제사 랑이 디기 된다래 현리아 근데 여바치야다 현 가르치나 지 강한테 나갈 디기 주는 지게 선배서 마라졸리아 랑치세 삼로 숙천보 여대로 와 제사 디네 자다 먼저 태가 침비기 취 로정 냠nen진의 잠니제 지 냠nen진의 파신 중에 냠nen을 파자지 로정도 제사다 가르고르세는 나르기 rang chizing samlo pa doje shen jeba zibe samlo di gehore so dumba gyulas dumba gyurse de ngar rang chizing samlo pa do ane da denege shen jeba zibe shen chizing samlo di sur geba jo nyamne jehore di pa geba jehore dumba gyurse di so that is in the she
So looking at the first point, so the order the Tibetan starts with, change your mindset. To change one's mindset, this refers to recognizing through one's education what the qualities are of a great being and thereby developing an aspiration for those. And then one needs to recognize where one is and strive to train in the way guided so as to cultivate those qualities within. So one will start by recognizing just how dominant our self-cherishing is. That at the center of all our thoughts is ourselves and our own wishes. We recognize this limitation and set the aspiration to abandon it, to cultivate the other cherishing attitude, whereby one will become the kind of person that sincerely places the fulfillment of the needs of others first and foremost. And to bring this about, one commits to and engages in training in the 6 perfections in order to weaken and eventually abandon the self-cherishing attitude through the cultivation of the other cherishing attitude. So this is the mindset that needs to be changed.
ngā zhele ina ngā sosa rāng digi kudu, ngā digi ku, ngā dunga da chā kudu, je digi chūna senpe ngā zhele rāng jepa zine, rāngi digi dunpa chi yu diwa re. Chisa da dine di nā xin nian due da rāngi lam yu nyamlin chiki ina rāngi tarbi kupa to kudu sepe, rāngi sede rāngi tarbi kupa to kudu, rāngi kowe dunga tala zhuye che tarbi kupa to kudu senpe dunya dunpa chi yu diwa da. Dine zada ngazu chapa chimpi lojong nyamlin cheba zada di samlo digi pa dor kukure sora da dor chene rang sayadi rangi dunyeri dewa dunyeri dunpa pa dor che shen jebar zimba shen liya digi chunga da shen dunga chaya shen digi dunga che dine dunpa pa gyur che di pa gitu pa chegor di nyamlin chegore mudu che di nyamlin chegore sora da dunpa gyur sayadi.
So what translated as mindset, it literally is aspirations. So if you think of the mental factors, there's that as mental factor of aspiration. But mindset is perhaps more general and therefore clear. It refers to changing one's aspiration, one's mindset, from being self-centered to other-focused. So right now, we are focused on achieving our own happiness and overcoming our problems. So as an aspirant for the Bodhisattva paths, as well as for those on the Bodhisattva's path striving for Buddhahood, this attitude has to be abandoned, the self-cherishing attitude. Other practitioners, those who have the wish to attain their own individual liberation, or who are already cultivating the paths of hearers and solitary realizers who are striving for their own individual liberation, this isn't a focus for them. But for those who want to become Buddhas for the sake of others, this aspiration or mindset has to be changed.
Dele jar chogore penanga zuge tanga zungela denege rang demba rang chue tam ji gang lai ma de rang wen de zhuba yue ba se da sen ji shu chen bo yue de wa de rang da ba gang lai ma rang wen de zhuba yue se ji rang ji sen rang da de zhuba da sen yue de wa ji sa da ta ba chim chue nyam ne pa xin zhu wen nyam ne che je ban za je go ji yue ba za ji sa rang ji sen da de zhuba jin ba da sen ji 주바 진바 도체 최근에시나 강라 떼보면 랑군의 주바 뛰네 주바시마도 강라마도 랑군의 주바지 요 말에 최탐지 밀람 기마다 오래 세베 삼로디파 안에 공바지 공부를 해서 그래 예마게 랑제신 다도지마 다선 삼로디파 도체다 최탐지 강라마 랑군의 주바 자오기니 메아 세베 밀람 기마다 오래 세베 삼로다 공 당도와시 고래서 Dumba Gyula said, Dumba Gyul said, 둔바들 랑 지진이 둔바 교시 현재바쯤에 삼로 곰나 직제 다 둔바들 녀르가 랑이 교라 다신 마리바 여바디 파 도전에 다음에 봐 곰백로 곰에 직제 니 용도 둔바 교시 니가 샤쇼스러와
So therefore, the one aspiration, austeric mindset, the one mindset to change is to transform the self-cherishing mind into the other cherishing mind. The other mindset that needs to be changed is that of grasping at phenomena, in particular the self, as existing in the way they appear, and to change that mindset into a recognition that phenomena are merely like dreams or like illusions, relating back to what we had in the first of the main practices, the second of the 7 points. So here, the practitioner will develop the aspiration that at all times to be on guard against grasping at the self as truly existent, and whatever phenomenon one is thinking about, grasping at that as being truly existent. So this then is the second mindset that one needs to change.
다던다라 태바침비고 로존 냠는 제바인자 가르자고라세네 랑셰랑레 랑제바도 로 셴제바도 로도 공부고르스케디나 데네 쉐담제 라신이 마주바 동바디 공부고르 시자다 셴제바쯤에 셴지진 삼라다 동방이 또 로티 비디네 디 공부고르에서 거다나디 송거다 대디 안주게 다데 가르세네 태바침이 취념는 산유고만 토바치이세 데네 전주심베 돈바슈도 파신줄 랍긴스 송게데 파신줄 랍세데다 랍긴세도 다데네 동반이 공부해야지 리고로 와시라기 파신념는 지게세 수고로와 지난 켈린지고 제자 디네자 데니기 dumba gyurshi nyama dumba gyurshida kanchele 동반이다 현지적인 삼로디 공고래 스테이트 모티체 베지시 공고래 사실 거로.
This we should understand this very much in the context of a bodhisattva who's made the vows of a bodhisattva, which are, I will engage in the various practices of bodhisattva so as to become a Buddha for the sake of others. Such a person, they will have a very clear aspiration to change their other cherishing mind into a self-cherishing mind. Maybe the other way around. To change their self-cherishing attitude into the other cherishing attitude. So this, as bodhisattvas, they would have already done. But they need to ensure that this remains dominant. The other cherishing mind remains dominant, and the self-cherishing doesn't sneak in. Likewise, they will have the aspiration to ensure aspirations. This word aspiration can also be translated as zeal, so it can be should be understood as very strong. So in this context of the new bodhisattva, it is very strong. This determined attitude not to be deceived by ignorance, but rather to cultivate wisdom in a stable way. So for the new bodhisattvas, made the vows of the bodhisattva, this is a very strong intent within them. So for us, perhaps not quite to that degree, but nevertheless, to become a Buddha, one needs to change the self-cherishing mind, self-cherishing attitude for the other cherishing attitude, and change our ignorance of self-grasping into the wisdom realizing emptiness.
마도 아다지 나 동방이 도인 도도 제제 줘봐 직접 돼다 나 랑치징이 삼로메 다 현재 받침으로 그냥 공부했습니다. 직 현리아 정 류가 줘봐 아니 지게 담을 돼요 말레스 지자디 류가 줘봐디 랑소샤세디 미지다 튠바 지소 튠바 전에 지되고레스 나삼로 냠는 디체 쥐 넘비들라 마지인 도도 아니 신인 도도 밀리아디 지교 말해서 얻는다디 소리 라소샤스도 능의 줘봐디 곧 지연의 튠바제도 혹시 샤고레소 제고레소.
Now, the final part of this second point, whilst remaining natural. So, whilst you are engaging in this process of this ongoing process of changing your mind, changing your mindset, in other words, changing the self-cherishing attitude into an other-cherishing attitude, changing one's ignorance of self-grasping into the wisdom realizing emptiness. Whilst one is going through this process over the entirety of one's training grounds, then, or the training paths, then one should ensure that whilst one's mind is changing, one continues to show yourself in accordance with those that one is amongst. So in other words, whilst one's mind is radically changing, one must not be trying to display yourself as this exceptional being, this remarkable person, but rather one should continue to act as an ordinary person amongst the ordinary people that you abide. So not try to elevate yourself amongst others. So this is the meaning of whilst remaining natural. So one is not putting on a display, showing this remarkable mind that you are developing. And this really is in the context of someone who is developing a remarkable mind. But nevertheless, they remain natural. They're not trying to make a display of these qualities they are developing.
지기 어당아 동반이 또 사이에 돼 판에 칸에시야 아직도 디시야라서 봐다 당아랑 지진요 말다 현재 받은 뭐 디공에서 나가게 되네시야라서 봐다 소주기 류기 넘겨나다 되네기 매도더라 제베이나 안에 즉 되네기 넘겨된 바이나 안에 디 베니 통한 미디기 차상 케링이 되면 따기로 아다면 그 모빈식도 그 준식도 아다고 고고등도 미 고고등도 선비게 삼로 코서는 되네기 안에 건들레 디버사기 규식으로 제자디 차상기 소송의 의인이 수디 템버셰베네 미카시기 템버레섬 카시기 준버시기도 섬으로 와디 미나소 감뭐 나소 여러 봐 제자디네자 안디네기 지기요 말해서 야직 소속이 야미 로마 이시여바 소속이 빼지 소속을 대바 덤지 유해쟁인데니 소속이 두제들이야 판도라 첨부 여바네 직 여바네 될 때네 냠내절에 공부도 좋투에 여바는데 아직 어디 되니기 여기 줘봐 되나 지서 차고로 받아 지고로 와 마도신 디디로
This is an important point, because one should act in accordance with one's motivation to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings. And with this motivation, one has qualities of love, compassion, and wisdom. So one needs to act in accordance with those that one is amongst, so as to benefit them, to guide them, to cultivate the qualities of the Dharma, and to gain freedom. So if one is presenting oneself in an extraordinary way, even if one has extraordinary qualities, this may benefit some, but others will have their doubts and they will criticize. And this is because one is amongst people of varying karmic backgrounds, dispositions, and so forth. So therefore, it is better to act in accordance with the customs and society, act in an ordinary manner, not in an elevated manner, so as to prevent others criticizing you. And why this is to be avoided is because you've developed these remarkable qualities inside. Others criticizing you, they will create non-virtue. If through your behavior, your speech, you are acting in a way that serves to cause others to create non-virtue, this is contrary to your goal of benefiting others in the most important of ways. Where there is an exception is those students who have stable faith in you, unwavering faith in you. Then, in a particular instance, a particular moment in time, where there'll be benefit to display a quality, then that quality can be shown. But not in terms of general behavior, but in an instant. Then that is okay. But in general, as it says here, one should remain natural, not elevate oneself.
And
then the third, speak not of the shortcoming of others. Shenle minubiki, that surim sonde, Shenle never chigmes, Sungoinza, Magone Shenle never Micheba, Yugone Shenle Neju, Yugone Shenle never chigmes, Songainza, Jeza Dinigi, Martige, Shengi Gunje, the Tida, David Tony Sixupta, Shenle Nubiki, 60 pa, Sungo, Jigio Mares, or Sungo, that the Yalan number German said. Just before our translator again said, here he's talking about what we know from the Lama as harsh speech. So here it may be useful to bear this in mind to get a broad understanding of what is meant by this term that's translated as harsh speech, because it's actually quite a bit broader than that. Now to come to what Genna said. So the third point, speak not of the shortcomings of others. So the shortcomings of others particularly refer to their physical shortcomings, so relating to the body, and then their speech. So how others are speaking, what they're saying, how they're speaking, and then in relation to their body. So one should not speak in, again, this word harsh, but in a harsh way, an aggressive way, an unkind way, a critical way of others' physical impediments would most probably be their disabilities. So if someone's physically not attractive, or they've got they can't walk properly, whatever, one shouldn't speak about them in an unkind way, or in terms of how they're speaking. One shouldn't criticize them, speak about them in an unkind way. And the reason for this, again, is the quality of ethics that a practitioner of this caliber needs to develop, needs to be really supreme. And therefore, the ethics is restraining one's mind within the bounds of what is ethical. Therefore, criticizing others, looking down on them, pointing out faults of no importance, this is contrary to one's goal of not harming others, but being of benefit to others, and becoming a Buddha for the sake of others. Therefore, one should not talk of the shortcomings of others, shortcomings relating to speech and physical and verbal shortcomings.
Dene 면발은 셈을 견치기로 어디 면발이 가르치기 위해서야 직강교 혀 가르치기 위해서야 아니 지금 국보교 가르치기 위해서 데네 기시 어디 시교 말해서
So I just checked, so I missed something there. So in terms of speaking not of the shortcomings of others, this doesn't only refer to their physical shortcomings and their way of speaking, but also mental shortcomings. So here, someone who's not intelligent, or maybe who has a mental impediment, there do not criticize them. So do not mock others. Do not speak about them in a derogatory manner, denigrating their unattractive or disabled body, or their unpleasant speech, or denigrating or mocking their mental challenges.
네, 당연히 뒤로 앞에 다 되니기미 오늘 지금 강바나 라바 타나 매간 지리네 오늘 코로나 타나 매나 양만 저기 치래 어저 강 요나 라교 랍나 그 거부용 바로 허셈 내기로 와. 다 되니게 지금 되니게 타나 여배네 양콩산에 되니 민도 직라 여러봐도 교강교 하시어서 라교에서 민도 따여로 어두시네 내기로 와. 제가 딘뉴그로 지자녀바는 코셈마기바 차요. 코셈마기바 차네 되는 소래 지 사망한 바섬 디바사. 제가 랑기 나기다 미션이야. 네바 네비기 체위 삼바디 나가스데 숨투고 말와. 이제 제가 디 숨고거리 디제디 시시교 말해서 디수로다 되나라.
Take someone with a physical disability. They don't want to meet you and hear from you like, oh, you don't look so good, or you've got this wrong or that wrong. They don't want to hear this from you. They don't even, most probably, don't even want to hear your pity. Rather, see them for the person they are. Engage with them in a way that brings joy to the mind. There's no need to remind someone of what they know. There's no need to see them only through the lens of their body or a mental impediment. Rather, speak to them in a way that brings joy to the mind.
난 대샤시나 디니 됐으니까 뒤져서 디니 가면 같이 진행을 봐자. 경주 뒤에는 다나 되게 난 가서 망고지 가서 가면 가르치 치워라 차서.
So then we can conclude there for today. It's still a few minutes before the end, but so if you have questions, then feel free to ask. Venerable Sepal?
I just have a question that from some of the discussion we had last night. So in the not having a biased attitude, the examples that Geshe mentioned with race or religion, things like that, would that non-biased attitude apply to the animal realm, for instance? So there was some discussion that came up about
liking some more than others.
Like would it be called condescension to be only focused on non-bias with humans? Do you understand it?
Yeah. So in terms of abandoning
non-biased.
Yeah.
Or does this statement apply to humans for us?
Yeah. So for ourselves in our own training to develop equanimity and impartiality and abandon bias, are we really just focusing on people, or should we also look at our attitude towards animals?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, is it, should we be looking for or wary of a condescending attitude to animals, for instance?
지부치기야 거. 레제데 지부치기야 땅에 심지 땅에 아주 밀리 아주 제시하마도 돼 심지에 다루와 소속이 다보게 심지들 야 제생이 심지들 되시는 말이 저거마다 이거라 지부치기하다 라나 심지 다 지게 간시네 미라 심지 차상이야 당연 보고를 당주기 뒤로와.
So yes, to humans as well as animals, we should guard against a biased or partial attitude, and rather try and develop a closeness, a valuing of all. And where this is maybe very apparent is if you've got pets at home. You love them greatly. You hold them as dear in a way that you perhaps do not someone else's pet or a wild animal. So we need to rather value all, see the good in all and the value in all beings, human and non-human. Yes, in the middle.
What is the difference between a realization and an experience?
Okay. What is the difference between a realization and an experience?
용화다 또 봐. 냠녀세. 니들 지단 지단의 용화단 또바세디 됐 차버 용그래 지단의 만주기 용화라도 다 삼다나를 망고요래 이내 당한도 다들 셰바이나 베네 시빈지레 카소요래 세디 만주기 조디 만용화시 김세 삼다제도 디 차우요래세 삼다제 동원이나 차우요래세 비기 하고 지 가소요래세 하고 저러보다 이 또바레데 뭐수 가서 조 녀요 말아 난 되네게 소수기 디 칼바 세베네 조디 다 뭐네라 가소요디 용고 또바다 녀와 니가 자용을 지사다 되네게 돈에 개발 해야지 용거래 지사다 다양한들 도스전에 내갑되네 샤나디고 용하세.
So certainly there is a difference between experience and realization. And within each of these, especially in realization, there are gradients. So to give an illustration, if you've never eaten chili, but you understand that what the effect of eating chili is, so you know intellectually, then you have an intellectual realization of chili, but you have no experience of eating chili. When you then eat it, and you see that what you're told is correct, you now both have a realization and an experience.
김세 삼단에 아니 저기 강 주모스에 뒤와전 진짜 장무여 봐야 하고 전에 뒤에 강나는 주변에 장무여래 세팅해서 체명해 봐니 아주 연구로 강나는 주요 말데 체명해 봐니 이기로 와 체명 또 봐 중으로 와 어디래는 장무여래 세배 샘다 줘 봐도 요로 와다 이내 디 강기 장무무서 요요를 배세 요요 말 와다 근데 신의 파조제 강한 주변에 다 관계 장모디 무슨 연구로 와야 돼 용서해야 돼 되니게 돈에다 이제 또 받아 용화세 되니게라 네 개발해 용서 샤쳐야 지도와
For someone who has never been in snow, they clearly have no experience of what snow is like. But they will have seen it, maybe seen it on television. They would have heard from their friends who've been skiing what snow is like, and maybe they have experienced something similar, like the ice in the freezer. So they have an intellectual realization of what the cold of snow is like, but they have no experience. When they get to go on their own skiing holiday, then they will have both an experience of the cold of snow, and they will have a realization of the cold of snow.
Yeah, that didn't say.
Okay, so thank you.